With 4 books under my belt now, I realized that every one of my books starts with a personal existential crisis. My most recent book, Bolder, which is about aging and ageism, started for me at a hockey tournament. I was playing with my team, the London Jets, and we were in the quarterfinals, and we were locked in a 0-0 draw with a team that we had annihilated the year before. And we just couldn't get the goal we needed to get into the semifinals. And I could feel the nerves and indignation coursing through my teammates. And then out of nowhere, I scored the goal to get us into the semifinals. And it wasn't just any goal. It was one of those highlight reel match of the day specials that I'll be dining out on for the rest of my life. So we got into the semifinals. I came off, and one of the organizers of the tournament sidled up to me and he said, "Carl, great goal, nice one. But guess what? I've just been looking at player profiles, and it turns out you are the oldest player here." Now, I knew I was one of the oldest, right? I mean, look at me, I'm not deluded. But suddenly to be the oldest just rocked me to the core. I could feel my foundations starting to sway. It was like in the blink of an eye, I went from goal scorer to granddad. And suddenly all these questions began crowding in, like, are people laughing at me behind my back? Do I look out of place here? Should I take up a more age-appropriate pastime like bingo? I came away from that tournament thinking, why is it that my chronological age has taken on suddenly this terrible power to define and limit me? You know, I was playing well, I was having fun. Surely that's enough. But suddenly my age had stepped in and said, no, you're too old for this. It's time to hang up the stick. It's time to go home and get your slippers on and smoke a pipe, right? And I thought this is just preposterous, right? There must be a better way of thinking about aging. So that was for me the spark. That was the trampoline to set off around the world to rethink my own take on aging.
Ageism is discrimination and prejudice based on age. It's taking everyone of the same age and pushing them all into the same box. Ageism harms all of us, whatever age we are.
So much of our vernacular, so many of the expressions that tip off our tongues when we talk about the idea of growing older are downbeat. They're grim, they're bleak. Senior moment, or showing my age, or feeling my age, or the wrong side of 40. This type of language becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, if you worship youth and denigrate aging, then you're going to age less well, right? You're more likely to suffer cognitive and physical decline, more likely to get dementia, and even more likely to die younger. So ageism, or buying into these ageist tropes, using ageist language, is the ultimate act of self-harm.
When people think of ageism, they often assume that it's a one-way train. So it's against older people. And for the most part, I think it is. But there is a reverse form of ageism, which is against younger people, which tells us that the young are callow, lacking in nous, unwise, overly innocent, right? Unable to, they just don't know how the world works, right? And that may be true for some young people, but it's also true for some older people, right? And I met a young financial advisor the other day here in London, and he said to me, and he's flying up the career ladder, superstar at his firm. But whenever he goes into meetings with clients, he always takes an older, gray-haired colleague to sit alongside him to ride shotgun. Now, this young guy is calling he's calling the shots. He's doing the meeting. He's the man. But he needs an older colleague there almost to put at ease the client who thinks, do I want to entrust my pension and my family fortune to this 27-year-old? So it cuts in both directions. If you set up a society or a culture that constantly bombards people with the idea that aging is a downward spiral, that you get to 35 and it's game over, or 40, or wherever you're drawing the line, what does that do to people who are under that line? It sets them a gruesomely tight deadline. It says to everybody in their 20s, get on your horse and go hell for leather, right? Because time is running. You've got so little time, right? It's all over once you hit your 30s. You've got to find the perfect career, find your life partner, maybe have all your children. You've got to do it all because you'll be stuck at home with a walking stick and slippers by the time you're 39, which of course is ludicrous. That's not what happens to most 39-year-olds. But I think, and I remember this even myself in my 20s thinking, whoa, I have this career goal. I have to get there by 30. Otherwise, I can just write it off, which is preposterous, right? And is bad for us because it locks younger people particularly into a race against the clock, which doesn't help anyone. These 30 under 30 lists are pretty hazardous. I mean, if you look at the most recent crop and alumni from the Forbes 30 under 30 list, they have together run up, I think it's $18 billion worth of scams and frauds in recent years. Now, that's not to say that everyone under 30 is a fraudster, of course not. But I think maybe explains that pressure to go fast, to get it all done by 30, might lead some people, the wrong kind of people who are inclined that way to begin with, to cut corners, to start looking for shortcuts that dance just on that line between what's right and wrong, what's legal and not legal. So I guess I feel like there are two ways to improve the situation. One is to have lists for every decade: 40 under 40, 50 under 50, 60 under 60, 70 under 70. That's one way to get away from the tyranny of 30 under 30. Another way is just to get rid of the age thing altogether and say, here are 10 people who are smashing it in AI. Here are people who are hitting home runs in home care for people with disabilities, and hold people up not based on the numbers on their certificate, but on the content of their character and the luminosity of their idea. To tackle ageism at every end of the spectrum and in the middle is mixing up the generations. Like, so much now of modern life is siloed. We're siloed off in our own age cohort, and we have very limited experience of people of different ages. And that void allows all of those ageist stereotypes to crowd in and flourish. So to tear down the silos, mix up the generations, get people, especially within companies. You can use reverse mentorship programs. You can have bowling nights. Anything that just gets people of different ages to sit around the table together to talk, and not in a tablets of stone from the older person down to the younger one, more on a flat level where everybody brings something different to the table and says, yeah, this is how I see the world, and get people having those conversations. And I think research is pretty good on this as well, that when people mix up and mingle with other generations, they become, number one, less worried about their own aging, and number two, they become less ageist. They are less likely to buy into the ageist tropes that hold all of us back at every stage. When I first started digging into the subject of aging and ageism, I thought of it as a completely separate thing from slow. I thought, this is a new chapter, no crossover. There is no Venn diagram here. But obviously, the deeper I got into it, the more I realized that there were touch points. So for a start, one of the reasons that we are so averse to aging, that we are enthralled to the cult of youth, is that we hate slowness, right? We abhor slowness. We are enthralled to speed. And speed and that kind of dynamism, energy is more associated with youth. So we think, well, in a society that looks down on slowness, as you get older, especially much older, you definitely start to slow down in some way. So that in and of itself explains, I think, our ageist culture, our cult.
It comes to all of us in the end, that crushing moment when you suddenly feel old. The trigger could be a milestone birthday, an illness or an injury, a romantic snub, or a missed promotion at work. For me, it was discovering that I was the oldest player at a hockey tournament. In the blink of an eye, I went from goal scorer to granddad. All these questions crowded in. Do I look out of place here? Are people laughing at me? Should I take up a more age-appropriate pastime, like bingo, perhaps? All of a sudden, the hot breath of ageism was on my neck. But it's time to shake this off. I'm now 55, and in many ways feel at the top of my game. So much so that this summer I'll be competing in the World Championships of Masters ball hockey. It just goes to show that it's never too late and you're never too old.